Redditors who suddenly came into a lot of money. What was your horror story of people begging for money? I once took second in a poker tournament and won $150k. There was an audience of about 200 people when it finished. Common practice was PPL ask winners for a lucky chip. I was almost mobbed by people begging for lucky chips as I left the casino. Had to be escorted by security and paid a friend $300 to follow me in their car, and we drove all over town for 2 hours to make sure nobody was following me home. I unexpectedly inherited about 4 years worth of take-home pay. Before I knew how much it would be, I told my best friend I'd be getting a few $1,000s. She immediately asked me to take her on a trip to Europe. That was the biggest thing she asked for, but she made other small requests as well. When the money came through, and it was a lot more than I'd anticipated, I did not tell my friend. Instead, I started distancing myself from her. I also did not tell any of my other friends. I did tell my boyfriend. He did not ask for anything. I took him on a trip to Europe. My grandma died a week before Christmas, and she left her house and 1/4 of her small fortune to me. The rest of the money went to my brother and my 2 cousins. My uncles and aunts have been a pain in my back ever since, claiming that the money/house Arthur's, etc. And I've also been approached by people who I haven't seen nor talked in a while. Even my ex, who dumped me for some Deutsche Bag rugby player, started talking to me again and inviting me to places, and she's still dating the same guy. Anyway, I'm not naive enough to lend those people money or befriend even. Luckily I have good friends and my brother as advisors. My money came in the form of accidental death inheritance after my dad died in a motorcycle crash. His girlfriend at the time was furious that he left everything to me. She tried to convince me to give her money, and when I refused she took everything, and I mean everything, from his house overnight. She rented 2 U-Hauls and her brother raided the place. Furniture, household supplies, food, clothes, everything was gone. By the time I got there, their only things left were a few t-shirts she left on the floor and a couple empty cans of soda on the kitchen counter. She even took things that held no monetary value, like a calendar I made my dad for Father's Day one year. It was just colorful cardboard and pictures of us I had glued together. She took it all. She started selling what she could on Facebook, mostly his woodworking tools and fishing gear, and she fled to somewhere in the next state over. We tried to get help from the police, but they didn't do much. She did a lot of other things that were bigger legal issues, I guess. For instance, she ran a fake GoFundMe claiming the funds were going to his funeral and managed to get over 10 grand from his cowhawkers, but I'm the one who paid for the services. Last I heard, they finally found her in some woodsy town, but I don't know what happened. It's honestly too emotional to deal with, and I've accepted the fact that she most likely destroyed or sold everything already anyway. It's been 2 years since this all happened. It's horribly sad, though. Edit/update. Wow, thank you all so much for the overwhelming support. It has been truly heartwarming to see so many responses. I definitely didn't expect this outcome. It means a lot to me. Since this is still getting traction today, I just want to take a quick second to clear something up. I didn't go into much detail in my relationship with his girlfriend and why I refused to give her any money. I genuinely cared for her and her daughters. I saw them as an extension of my family, and as soon as I learned I was sole beneficiary, I had already been planning to take some money and help them get stable in an apartment and get a fresh start. I would have had no problem helping them. Unfortunately, she didn't even give me the chance before she showed her true colors. Before we even had the funeral, she was blowing up my phone every hour on the hour, leaving angry voicemails, coming to my apartment, and beating on the doors. She even contacted my mother, making threats trying to get through her to me. At that time I hadn't received any money. It isn't like it all just falls in your lap the second the person passes. It was a few months before I got settlements, and even now I'm still in the process of retrieving funds from the roll of a 401k. I was just a scared, broke, naive kid. I had hoped she was just grieving the wrong way, just taking anger out where she could, and that everything would blow over. It didn't. About 2 or 3 days after the funeral, I got a frantic call from my dad's sister that she had called threatening to burn his house down. We rushed over there together and luckily the house was still standing, but the doors were hanging wide open, and when we went inside that's when we found out everything was gone. We went to his neighbors, and they told us she had been there with a man whose description matched her brother, and described them moving everything out and leaving. I wish they had called police then, but since they knew her as my dad's girlfriend they chose not to. My dad's wish was for me to be financially secure and safe. He made sure of that. But I didn't just throw them to the wind and say good luck. It was a traumatic and confusing situation, and if I could go back in time I'd make a lot of things different, but I can't. As of now I'm not going to be responding to any more comments here, unless it's extremely necessary. I woke up to 41 notifications from this thread, and while I appreciate the support and I'm reading the responses I'm just extremely overwhelmed by it all. So a few years out of college my girlfriend and I were living in a sort of large communal apartment with 5 other people, 2 bedrooms, 2 couches in the common area. I had just gotten a significant promotion at my job, and that situation was exceptionally below my means, but my GF was convinced that these were her people and they were all going to become great philosophy writers and poets by living together and sharing experiences. They were all unemployed or underemployed and experienced moochers, so I was very careful not to let them know I was saving large sums of money with the intent of moving out soon and taking my GF with me or not. One day the other couple had an argument about rent, and to try and keep them from coming to blows my GF promised them that I'd cover it for them and showed them one of my pay stubs, which I guess they showed everyone else. I got home from work and walked right into an apartment meeting ambush where everyone else informed me that they wanted me to contribute more meaningfully and they'd put it to a vote before I got back. I told them that I was already paying for their food, that they kept guilting my GF into buying for them, topping up the apartment emergency fund instead of stealing from it like the rest of them, and many other things, and that I wasn't going to cover other people's rent as well. The next day, when I was at work, someone went into my room and destroyed my laptop, which was the only thing of value I owned at the time. I collected the few things I wanted to take, told my GF I was breaking up with her, and walked out. I can give an answer although it is developing at this stage. All throughout school I was a bit of a loser, didn't do well in class, and never really cared. I used to go out all the time with my friends, and would hang out with them all the time. After school I didn't do much other than waste time, until I found my wife, and wanted to start being better for her. I did a 1-year software development course, and then got a pretty shitty job making almost nothing in my country, South Africa. When my wife got pregnant all my friends basically ghosted me as I wasn't going to be going out partying with them anymore. They wouldn't return my texts or even answer my calls. A few years down the line I landed a very high paying remote job, $200k plus, for a SF based company. The average salary for a software developer in South Africa is around $30k per year. My wife was very proud of me I think, and posted a picture of me on her Facebook standing next to my new car that I had just bought. Not 20 minutes after she posted it, I started getting messages from some of my old friends saying that it had been a while and they wanted to catch up and really missed me. There was one guy I always had a soft spot for, and decided that I would go have dinner with him and see how the last 4 years of his life treated him. We hadn't even ordered our food, yet when he dropped the bomb on me that he felt that I owed him a lot of money for always being there for me, and that I would be selfish to not give him some money as I had so much, I quietly just got up and left. I eventually changed my number and deactivated my social media accounts, but people still harass my wife and mother to try and get some money out of me. This doesn't even go into the absolute shit I had coming from my dad's side of the family who are basically hillbillies. Not exactly horror story, but I've always made more money than most of my friends. Some of them would hit me up for cash, but usually I only agreed to small amounts or said no. I did however have a very close friend who I really enjoyed the time we spent, but we liked to drink, so bars were our go-to hangout. I usually ended up paying for the entire night, to the point where he said he wasn't comfortable hanging out because he never had the money. But I genuinely did like just hanging and he always bought the first round. That's respect. So, I knew this girl who was a sex worker, had known her for years, and we had even briefly dated before she got into that line of work. She was always really open about what she was doing and that she enjoyed it, which I believed, because this woman was a freak, in a good way. In fact, one of the reasons things hadn't worked out was that she was way too kinky for me, and I'm pretty open-minded. She always explained it to me like this: I would be a total slut either way, so why not get paid for it and not have to work? Fair enough, I didn't question it. Fast forward like 10 years, and I had inherited a bunch of money. Not like obscenely wealthy, but enough to really change my lifestyle. And I still talk to my friend regularly, even though we live in different parts of the country. She was one of the few people who was there for me consistently through some really dark times, and I was there for her in the same way, and I really valued her friendship. She started talking about how she wasn't young anymore, and she wasn't happy anymore doing what she was doing, and wanted to change directions. You probably can guess where this was going. She had a plan that seemed pretty good. I was also in the midst of intentionally drinking myself to death, and I was pretty sure I was going to die soon. I came very close, so I didn't really care about money. I ended up giving her $10,000 that she needed to go back to school, not a loan, just gave it to her. I don't know what she spent it on, drugs probably, but she didn't go back to school. She abruptly cut off contact with me after 12 years, and that was that. Obviously I didn't die, although as I said I came extremely close. I still have money, so I'm not even mad about that. And she was legitimately a huge support in my life for a long time, when there was no expectation of her ever getting anything out of it, so I'm still grateful for that. I think her demons just got the best of her, and she's probably really ashamed or maybe even dead, but it was such a painful betrayal. When my grandmother died, her will stipulated that everything was to be split 3 ways. A third to my mother, a third to my uncle, and a third to be split evenly between my sister and I. My uncle wanted to sell my grandmother's house immediately to get more money out of it, but I wanted to keep it for sentimental reasons. My parents gave me a bit of money, and I used all my inheritance to buy out my uncle's share of the house. I paid my parents back over the next few years, but the property became much more valuable. Over the following 10 years, while I lived in the house, property values in my city exploded. The house that I bought was also in a very desirable neighborhood and was worth well over double what I paid for it. It has continued to climb. When I paid out my uncle's share, the estimated value was around $300,000. Last year the neighbor's house, almost identical, sold for $945,000. Needless to say, my uncle has said multiple times that when I sell the house, he is legally entitled to more money out of it. That is bullshit. He is not getting another penny from me. I plan to live here for many more years. He will be long dead by the time I sell. I inherited my beloved grandma's house alongside with some other properties. As the house and the properties are near a very rapidly developing city, prices have skyrocketed and lead to me inheriting about $1.5 meters in value. That may sound awesome at first, but it truly isn't. The house is a very old brick house, built in the late 1700s, and the properties are so small and widely distributed I can't really sell them for a good price. As the house is a listed historical building, every little repair has to be done by state-approved professionals for restoration and conservation of old buildings, which basically doubles, if not even triples the costs. I rented it out, but the rent I get is barely enough to cover the costs of repairs, insurance etc. I'm lucky if I get even by the end of the year. But as this house is where my family used to live for the last 4 generations before my dad bought the ranch and moved there with my mum, I want to keep it in the family as long as possible. Now, somehow, word has spread that I inherited a lot of money. I did my best to stop these rumors, but it didn't work out. I've never had many friends, but the ones I have are true quality friends. They will do everything for me, and I will do everything for them. After I got the house and the rumors spread, I got invitations to dinner in some really fancy restaurants. I was invited to sport events, I don't even like sports, and some other very costly activities. All these came from people who claimed to be my friends. Needless to say, they expected me to pay for everything. You've got so much money, what do these $500 matter to you? I'll pay you back sometimes. etc. were the common phrases I got to hear. The best one were, you are way too young, 28 BTW, to have this kind of money, so just give it to us. You don't deserve to have so much money. You have never worked a day in your life. Been working at the power plant since I was an apprentice at 18, worked my way up to deputy manager / shift supervisor, while the guy this came from was unemployed, as long as I can remember, and lived from welfare. I have now learned who to trust, and to spot telltale signs of vultures. Friend of mine lost both parents in the span of about 4 months. They were pretty old, so it wasn't completely unexpected, but it still sucked for her. Anyway, when the first parent died, I went to the funeral to offer support. It's a small affair, few dozen people and most of them friends instead of family, and it's also where I found out that my friend's parents have been on minimal contact with their families because neither side approved of the marriage. Then the second parent dies 4 months later, and I go to funeral again, but this time there are well over 100 people there. It seemed like every aunt, uncle, nephew, and niece suddenly showed up. After the funeral, I'm waiting in the reception area before my friend and her brother come out to thank everybody for coming, and I overhear multiple people talking about how much they're hoping to get in the inheritance. My friend's parents didn't leave a will, so the entire inheritance automatically gets split 50/50 between her and her brother. I didn't see the drama firsthand, but I've heard stories from her much later about the whole ordeal. A few people were decent about it, but most of the family were absolutely horrid. They tried sucking up at first. When that didn't work, they got angry. One aunt apparently threatened to not let my friend see her nephew, even though she had seen that nephew maybe twice in 10 years. Got a $7,000 settlement from a car accident. I accidentally left the check on the corner table in the living room. My dad walks into my bedroom and asks if I can lend my mom any money. I work minimum wage retail and ask him how much does she need. He says how about half of that $7,000 check. It has been almost 8 years. I haven't seen any of that money back. Not sure if it really fits, as we never actually received the money in the end and I'm not too clued in on the details, but anyway. About 10 years ago or so, my grandfather called my mother one day exclaiming that he'd finally netted in excess of £1 million worth of property, a big deal for my family. Of course he wasn't doing anything with it. He was always a frugal man, and remained that way until the day he died. As the years went on, his health deteriorated in more ways than one, progressing to the point where he needed to have full-time care and ultimately ended up being put in a home. Now we currently live in Australia. My family is mostly still in the UK. My aunt who still lives there was responsible for sorting out all of his needs. Time went on and sadly he ended up passing away. As all of this was happening, she was looking into his financial details and his will and whatnot. What was peculiar was that in his state of dementia, he had apparently at some point closed all of his bank accounts and withdrawn any money in cash. How? I don't know, but as a result of that, what with all of the costs of supplying care to him in his home and whatnot, the banks believed that we had hidden the money somewhere and refused to help. What seems to have actually happened is that someone, possibly even himself, who knows, influenced him to withdraw all the money, bought things he didn't need, that then didn't even turn up anyway, had repairs done on the house that either didn't need to be done, or didn't actually get done anyway yet were still paid for, then variously distributed in other ways, until it was all gone. The only shred of a paper trail that we have, is that we got word that his gardeners no longer live in the UK, seemingly up and left around the same time this all happened, and now live in the Canary Islands. When I was young, like 10, I won $100 on a Nevada pull tab ticket at the local country fair. It was in a curling rink, where vendors had handmade crafts. When I cashed it, a lady who was selling knitted teapot cozies was like, "Oh, where are you going to spend all that?" Then she asked me to spend $15 on one of her cozies. I told her thanks, but I'm going to save it for a video game console, original Nintendo. She then called me a fucking selfish little ass, and said her teapot cozy was much more valuable than a stupid video game. I was so nervous I just bought one. I gave it to my mom, and she thought it was the most wonderful gesture, and it turned out that lady was right. The love I got from that cozy was much more valuable because my mom paid the difference for the Nintendo the next week. Before the recession hit, my dad had a pretty lucrative small business and we lived comfortable middle class lives. He would often lend his family money, since most of his sisters didn't amount to much in their lives. They would never pay him back, and often hassle him to give them money, since he was so well off. After the recession hit, we took a big dive and still were able to live okay, but had to sell a lot, no more insurance, and basically lived paycheck to paycheck, while my dad worked 7 days a week to make ends meet. After all he's done over the years, not one of them would help when we needed it. One of my uncles has even been even more well off with a car dealership and refused to aid my father with a loan, even though my father always pays his debts regardless of if others do the same. None of his sisters have ever repaid a cent of his generosity. I have a lot of terrible stories about them through the years, and finally he's cut them all out of his life after almost losing my mom through divorce last year, partly BC of his horrid family and how they treated her, and nearly drinking himself to death the past 3 years. They are truly terrible greedy people, and it's all taught me a lot about the kind of person I want to be and who I want to surround myself with. A guy I grew up with came into a lot of money after his grandfather died. His father and aunt got more, and it filtered down through to the grandkids. I'd moved away so hadn't seen or spoke to him much, but caught up when visiting my parents. All his friends started inviting him out for drinks, which he'd pay for his own. Meals, again paid for his own, like he would normally do. Wouldn't splash the cash, and invested a good chunk of it. When we caught up I asked him how things were, and he told me about all of that, which I hadn't known, so I made a remark of how well did the investments go. Why? How much are you after? I'm not, just asking. He was so used to people being interested in how much money he had, it had become normal. He was unfriended by so many people because he wouldn't blow all his money on superficial things. The investments had done really well, and he had a fair amount of money in the bank and still invested. So I congratulated him on savvy financial planning, but wasn't interested in his money, which was refreshing for him. His brother and cousins had wasted all their inheritance, his uncle and aunt too, but as his parents ran their own business, I suppose the fact they had invested their cut was normal thinking for him. I asked how bad did the begging get? His brother tried to access his online banking to transfer money to his account. Parents were not impressed. His cousins sent him and his parents fictional bills for expenses relating to the funeral 4 years after the burial. It was shocking the lengths these people went to because they had squandered their money and wanted more. I wished him all the best for the future, and we've chatted a bit on social media, and the begging/conning is still going on. 10 years later, his brother is now heavily in debt, but no one will bail him out, which he thinks is unfair. People weren't begging, but we felt like they were jealous and envious and did not approve of our decision. Basically, my husband came into money because he had a number of severe permanent injuries from his prior job. So he got paid out a large sum and decided to stop working for a while. This was because we had been through some very serious illness. I was ill, and personal circumstances which fucked us both up mentally, so we wanted to take the time to recover our mental health. And secondly, he needed to study to change careers because he was unable to work in his former career due to injuries. Many people, even our parents, disagree with him having even a few months off work to recuperate. This really shits me up the wall. And there have been so many people that don't think we deserve the money and are envious of the house we were able to buy with it. Asterisk. My uncle would have been classified as working poor. A job, a wife, a kid, an apartment, but living paycheck to paycheck. They won the little lotto, and with another winner, my uncle got like 200k. They walked away from the apartment, bought the largest house in the poorest neighborhood, and their friends always seemed to need something. I remember as a kid, they often had friends living in the guest room. They bought 2 new cheap cars, and then come property tax time, they were broke, and once again working poor. I mean, if I buy you a scratch-off ticket, and you win 5 large, I don't expect anything other than a hearty handshake. If you would like to take me to the Chinese buffet, I would not argue though. I can be bought. My so recently won a lawsuit, and got a shit ton of money. My family found out, but they never asked him for anything, but his friends kept inviting him out and would ask for him to pay. They would even ask to borrow thousands. My partner bought a house and the friends always wanted him to dump me so they can move in with him and live a bachelor life. He eventually cut them off because he did let them borrow some money, and once they received it would block his number and only contact him when they wanted more. Personally never thought he would get that much money, never expected anything from him. I wouldn't necessarily call it begging, but more of a change in people's social demeanor. For example, me and my friends would all go to the movies, mall, or we would just go to a store to pick up essentials. Ever since my friends started getting tipped off that I had more money than them due to my clothing being a little more higher end and usually having the newer gadgets and whatnot, they usually would start asking me to pay for their stuff such as pet food, borrow money, etc. I never really thought much of it, but then when I started to realize this happened, after I started enjoying life a little more, I started to understand. Not technically begging, but still a horror story in my opinion. When I was around the age of 5, I had a job. Of course, my mom helped out tremendously and got me involved in this career platform, but it took a lot of time and effort on both of our parts, so we quite the profit from it. All the money was deposited under my name though, so I could use it once I turned 18. Didn't know this until I actually turned 18, but a trusted family member who knew my account information went into my account and took a good portion of money. It was pretty fucked up realizing that someone who had already done some pretty fucked up shit to me during my life also felt comfortable enough basically stealing money from a child. Still upsets me to this day because I wish that money cold gone to my mom. She deserved it more than anyone. Edit. For those wondering what job I had at age 5, I was in the acting and modeling industry. My long-term ex got, in total over the space of a year, almost £60,000 in inheritance. His grandmother died and left each child and grandchild exactly £40,000, and then his mother died, and she left around £16/17,000 to him, and £2,000 to me, and £50 each grandchild including my son. He didn't tell many people, but the people he did tell were scum. One asked for drug debt to be paid off, which was a few thousand. Another asked to borrow money to take his family on holiday despite having an insanely well-paid job, and the best one was somebody asked him to put a deposit down on a house for them and exclaimed they will pay it back over 10 years. So, he bought motorbike lessons/tests, then an actual motorbike, knew a Bandit, a quad bike, Raptor 660, and then he put a deposit on a house, £40,000, and our mortgage repayments were £340p/m because of that. He gave me and my son and his 2 sons a life. I received 14 properties when my last parent died, and the amount of people who crawled out of the woodwork to ask for a loan were unreal. It's really unfortunate that many of them were in a state that publicly publishes details of an estate when probate is granted. Cut contact with every single one of them. I never asked them for money. Why would they think it acceptable to ask me? I'm a fairly average guy in my mid-20s who always wears the same $2 shirt and $5 jeans, but over the years it started to leak out that I had some money after a combination of me buying a business in my very small hometown, a gossipy girl from school who saw me on Seeking Arrangement, and enough social media posts showing me constantly traveling in business class or whatever, and the fact I seemed to do very little actual work. Then in the last year or so I've discovered a seemingly entire new branch of my family tree and a whole bunch of people from high school I don't remember ever saying more than a few words to suddenly claiming me as their childhood best friends. I caught up with an old actual schoolmate who knew me well enough and were having coffee, and she asks, "Is it true you bought a plane?" And a few things like that were absolutely insane. The Chinese whispers in my town had apparently gone absolutely crazy, and I'm always uncomfortable running into someone when I'm back there because everyone thinks I'm some crazy playboy millionaire when I spend most of my time in a blanket fort on the internet like everybody else. The extended family are the worst though, because they harass my mum, dad and grandmother who know nothing about my financial situation to borrow money. Many of these people I've never met in my life. Not an interesting story, but definitely an annoyance in my life. Not exactly a horror story, but kinda funny anyway. I got front-ended in a car in 2016, and it messed me up pretty bad. My lawyer fucked up the case, and by the time it settled, the medical costs were paid, and the lawyers took most of it, for being shit at their jobs. I had a high 5 figures in my bank account. My estranged mother just smelled that I had money somehow and started asking for loans and if I wanted to go on vacations with her and things. Seriously, no one in my family would ever talk to her or tell her I had cash, but she had some sort of sixth sense where she figured it out and suddenly wanted to reconnect with me. Fucking amazing. What sucks is I let her swindle me for a bit of it. She gambled with it and won $2,000 at a casino. But hey, she bought me lunch that day, so I guess my mother has technically gotten me something in the last 2 decades. Perhaps slightly off topic. Since young I've been always fascinated by business. When I was 17 I managed to get a lot of followers on Instagram and make a dropshipping store. Cringe, I know. Back then it was actually working out really well for me. In high school I loved talking about it, but most people were just interested in how much money I was making. I had this friend who said his family had money issues and needed to support them. This was fake. I found this out after. So when I was on holiday, I let him take over my store. I was away for a month, and we had $2,000 in sales. When I got back I found out he did not send the right products to the customers, much cheaper lookalikes. I told him he had to pay everything back, but he didn't want to. Long story short, I had to pay back the $2,000 with my savings account. This money was actually reserved for my tuition fees, so it sucks a lot. My mother died, and I ended up being the 50-50 beneficiary with the other half being my stepfather. My stepfather mentioned that my mother had a lot of debts and asked if I'd be willing to help with some of them. Being more than a little naive and thinking it would be, at most, $5,000, I said sure, how much do you need? The first quote he gave me was $25,000, and it wasn't that substantial of an inheritance I received. I was pretty flabbergasted and basically backed off a bit to say I needed to think about it. However, every time I inquired again, wondering if he'd rethink his actions, the number he asked for kept climbing. Then the requests turned into demands. Now I don't talk to my stepfather at all. The final number he demanded was more than what I received in the first place. And I was not a rich, well-established person with a career at the time. I was 21 and still very much struggling to find my way after having been essentially driven out of home. He hadn't been my abuser, and I had kind of held out hope at the time that, even though he stood back for most of the abuse, he himself wasn't that bad of a person. Took me several years to realize just how fucked up it is to demand the inheritance money of the poor, struggling, abused child of your dead spouse.